Hi, Gina, and anybody else who might be watching this in the future. My name is Kevin Doyle, for those of you who don't know my name, and I am here to talk to you today about SCP. SCP is a creepypasta website that is a collection of stories ranging in genre, told in the style of a secret government document detailing the scientific study of dangerous paranormal activities by a secret government agency called the SCP Foundation. Now, SCP stands for Secure, Contain, and Protect. So essentially what the Foundation tries to do is it studies these paranormal events, tries to contain them so there's not an outbreak so that people don't find out, and then studies them after it's been contained. The links to the two posts can be found in the video description or in the brief write-up that I did. The first one that you want to read is Treats, and it tells the story of a cruel monster hunting trick-or-treaters on Halloween and brutally slaughtering them, while it is also pursued by operatives of the SCP Foundation that are tasked with retrieving it. And then the story SCP-106, the other post, gives more background information on the monster and its relationship to the Foundation. The monster of the story, SCP-106, also referred to as 106, is a hideous creature that looks like a decrepit old man covered in black caustic sludge. Everything that the creature touches immediately rots or corrodes, and that includes people. To quote from the post SCP-106 itself, SCP-106 causes a corrosion effect in all solid matter it touches, engaging a physical breakdown in materials several seconds after contact. The creature is also capable of traveling to another dimension, referred to as a pocket dimension. It will often kidnap victims and bring them to the pocket dimension, where it will torture them until they die. To quote again from SCP-106, it appears that SCP-106 will play with captured prey and appears to have full control of time, space, and perception inside this dimension. SCP-106 will pick a target, usually a weak one, and pursue it, hunt it, until it is no longer able to run. Now, the real scary thing about SCP-106 is that it doesn't hunt because it needs to, it's not because it's hungry, its only motivation is that it wants to, it enjoys the hunt, it enjoys inflicting pain on other people. SCP-106 is essentially evil. I think that this following passage best exemplifies the horror of this monster. She screamed, or tried to. The sound squelched a little more than a harsh bark by the sheer volume of pain, limbs suddenly boneless and leaden, nerves dead except for agony. She felt fingers touching her ribs from the inside even as they were slowly eaten away and corroded, her body shifting slowly to face the hand's owner. The flicker of the distant flare showed something withered, dark, slimy and pulpy soft, but wiry and strong too. Two milky black eyes glistened at her in a too large head, hovering over a frozen corpse grin, teeth thin and chipped. Don't like that. No, that's scary. And I know that what's scary is subjective, but it's horror right there. Due to the creature's hideous appearance, its dangerous nature, its manner of killing people, and its insidious intentions, it really manages to be a menacing force throughout the entire story, to the point where it really feels unstoppable. And personally, I find that terrifying. Besides just SCP-106, there is another antagonist in the story as well. And this is actually a thing that is common throughout most SCP stories, and that is that the Foundation acts as an antagonist as well. The Foundation, the manner in which that they capture SCPs, contain them, and keep their organization secret is often very insidious. I think a good example of this is in SCP-106's description. When they're describing the containment procedures that they use to capture SCP-106 when it escapes. So, in the event of a breach event by SCP-106, a human within the 10 to 25 years of age bracket will be prepped for recall, with the compromised containment cell being replaced and restored for use. When the cell is ready, the lure subject will be injured, preferably via the breakage of a long bone, such as the femur, or the severing of a major tendon, such as the Achilles tendon. Lure subject will then be placed in the prep cell, and the sound emitted by said subject will be transmitted over the site public address system. I mean, that's also horrifying. Like, it's horrifying in a different way, but it is horrifying. It shows the horrors of man, what people are capable of. And this cold, objective way of looking at this horrible act, it adds another layer of complexity to the horror in SCP-106. So I've told you plenty about SCP, and specifically SCP-106, the story that I want you to integrate into this class. So let's get into why you should teach this story. I think that the first reason we should hit on is the different types of writing styles that are incorporated into it. So like I said earlier, SCP-106 is told through the two posts, SCP-106 and Treats. They are told in a very different style. As I mentioned vaguely earlier, SCP-106 is told in sort of the generic SCP way, that is, it's told like a secret government report, like as if some sort of scientist wrote this up, some agent wrote it up, and it's kept in a database. That's the way it's formatted, and that is where sort of the cold, apathetic nature of the horror of the Foundation comes from, and basic knowledge of SCP-106 comes from. And then there's Treats, which is a more narrative way of telling the story of SCP-106, in which we follow the victims of SCP-106. I think that by comparing these two stories that both work together to tell a cohesive story, by looking at the ways that they tell the story differently, the ways that, a narrative story feels different and has a different type of horror to it than the objective, cold SCP way of looking at things. I think that by comparing those two, you could have a really interesting discussion about how the way a story is written about the same subject can have vastly different implications about the horror within the stories. So another reason to study SCP-106 is just because it's a creepypasta. Like Pen Pal, SCP-106 follows sort of a new, unique way of telling a story, in that there's all these different posts you can read to enhance your understanding of it or to see a new perspective on it. And the two you really want to look at are SCP-106 and Treats, because those are the two primary posts that were created by the original author. There are other hyperlinks throughout SCP-106 that you'll actually want to ignore, I think, for the purposes of telling this story and for teaching this story in class. But the fact that that stuff is out there and that you can look into it and decide what you think is relevant for this class, I think it's very similar to Pen Pal and its format, and that studying that sort of new media aspect to the story could be interesting, kind of reveal similar implications to new horror that Pen Pal did, and as did Diana House. The third reason why I think that you should incorporate SCP-106 into your curriculum is because of the monster. We didn't study any monsters really this semester, and while that makes sense because we studied people, places, and things, I think studying a monster would be very interesting, and that SCP-106 is a very unique monster in the way that it's constructed, the things that make it different from a monster like Alien or Michael Myers, just the things that make it evil. And I think that it could still fit into one of the 3 units that you taught this semester, but still give us a chance to look at a monster, kind of like the way A Quiet Place allowed us to look at monsters in the context of places. So I've already brought up a few comparisons between SCP-106 and some of the other things that we read this semester. I do think that the closest aesthetic comparison that can be made is between SCP-106 and A Quiet Place. Both monsters are very hideous, they're hard to look at, and they're scary in just their presence. Another good example is Pen Pal and Diana House. Like both of those, as I was saying earlier, it forces you to follow a lot of different threads to understand the whole story. I think that for the purposes of this lesson, you would want to focus on just Treats and SCP-106, but there are other stories told by other authors related to SCP-106, sort of offshoots, some of which are very interesting, some of which are very good. I'll link a couple of those as well in the description below, one of which tells the backstory of SCP-106, its origin, and it's very interesting, but it's very, very long, and it's not really horror, it's just sort of ancillary content. And then there's another one that is also more narrative, like Treats. And it's actually a really great horror story, but the problem with it is that it requires a lot of the details in the other story. It requires a lot of those details to make sense, but it also contradicts a lot of details in that story. So you kind of need to read both stories for it to work. One of those stories isn't horror, and they contradict each other. So as interesting as they are, and as much as they tell more of a full story about SCP-106, I wouldn't recommend them, because then you kind of get into a situation like Diana House, where there's a lot of confusion about what's going on exactly. And that was part of the fun of Diana House. But here, I think it would be better to just sort of focus on the monster, focus on the people, focus on the themes that are being told in SCP-106 and Treats. The only other comparison I want to make is between the story and Foul Play, because they're both very much revulsion tales. Foul Play, the horror at the end, the revulsion of seeing the protagonist's dead body, strewn throughout the baseball field, is a lot like the horror in the story of, reading about SCP-106 melting someone's insides, grabbing their ribs from the inside and pulling them out, stuff like that. It's very nasty, very upsetting stuff, but it's still horror, and it has a quality to it that is refreshingly disgusting, I would say. So that's the other comparison I would make. So, hopefully at this point I've convinced you that you need to teach this story. It's just so good. But regardless of if I have or haven't, where this would fit into your lesson plans. I think that SCP-106 would fit great into the people category, particularly because it's really a story about a monster that is, it's humanoid, so it's like a person, but like just a purely evil person. It's about them, it's about the Foundation, which is, also in a sense evil. It's made up of people, and then it's about victims. That's essentially what Treats is entirely about. Treats is mostly about victims. This story is really a story about apathy towards victims, which is really interesting, I think. I think that that's a necessity in a lot of gore horror, and a lot of, revulsion horror. I think this is a great example of instances where you feel apathetic towards the victims, but you don't feel like you should. I think that for the lesson plan, you really just want to focus on themes of, humans as monsters, juxtaposing the monster and the Foundation, themes of body corruption, so the ways that the monster corrupts the bodies of the individuals that it tortures or kills. Think about themes of victim apathy. Are there certain victims we feel apathetic towards? Why not? And just themes of revulsion. I think if you focus on all those things, there's a lot of interesting discussion to be had there. So, yeah, that pretty much wraps up the video for the most part. The only other thing I want to mention is that if you're not convinced, well, sorry, I tried my best. But if you are a little convinced, not quite, like I just didn't quite get you to being fully convinced, read the story, see what you think. And if it still doesn't capture your attention, you're still not certain that you want to throw it in, consider other SCPs. That's a huge, there's tons of them, so there would be a lot to search through. But I'm going to put a few more in the description, like a few other SCPs I would suggest taking a look at if you're interested. I just picked this one because it's very close to my heart. It's the first one I ever read, and I think it's terrifying, personally. But there are a lot of other good SCPs out there. Off the top of my head, SCP-87 is awesome. It's very short, it's sweet, and honestly, if you're just looking for good horror to read, you could just Google other SCPs that are supposed to be scary and just do a deep dive if you got the free time. If you're looking for some creepypastas to read for fun. SCP's full of stuff like that, and I couldn't recommend it enough. So I guess with that, thank you for watching. Thank you for having me in your class. It's been a lot of fun, honestly. Really, it has been. So, thanks. See you around.